we're going to continue discussion, which is unusual for facilities, but it is a facilities, does all of this work together. Finance, facilities, student assignment, academic achievement, I mean, this all rolls up, and we're happy to take on a committee visit, a work group visit of the most recent draft of the proposal to open Buckhorn Creek and the necessary adjustments of that in student assignment in that part of the county. So,
apologize, we're getting used to the new system here. I will sit over here.
Okay.
say I was at a presentation when I was back in the advertising business, and some general who had been the general of the South American drug wars from the military was making a presentation with a pointer, and he would, next, and of course there were at least 3 corporals over running the video shoot, right? Next! So Joe, you're going to get the next, and you'll do it well, I'm sure.
Well, here's to work when I'm sitting over here.
Okay.
All right.
All right, so Glenn, you're the general, I guess.
Far from. This is.
Yeah.
I know my role.
So as you recall, last week at the board meeting, you approved the enrollment plan for 18-19 with the exception of a portion concerning Buckhorn Creek. So what we're bringing today is the final staff proposal for consideration of the board to be voted on next week as the final piece of the 18-19 enrollment plan that has not yet been approved. I'm going to turn it over to Glenn.
You can skip to the next slide. All right, so what we're going to bring back is I'm going to show you the original proposal that we had presented on December 5th, and then I'll go into the new proposal that we're presenting today to the Facilities Committee. Going back, Buckhorn Creek is slated to be open as traditional calendar with year-round application schools of Herbert Akins, and then Holly Grove and Holly Springs, depending on where you live. So for the people who were coming out of Holly Grove Elementary, we were offering Holly Springs as an additional year-round application school for those addresses. It has a projected capacity of 662 students, and the impacted schools were Herbert Akins, Fuquay Varina Elementary, Holly Grove Elementary, Lincoln Heights, and Willow Springs. And a lot of that had to do with us looking ahead towards E35 that's going to be opening up in 2020. And so looking to make some of those moves now to prepare for the moves of when that school will open and that base attendance area. And you can see E35 is right over here in this section here, currently in the Willow Springs Elementary base attendance area.
Just back up, if you will.
Sure.
How will someone apply to go to year-round school in 2018? So when will they do that, and how will they do that?
So January 10th through the 31st, they'll apply for the designated year-round schools for their address. They can get those schools. They're listed in the address lookup feature. They will do so. It's part of the magnet application, so you can apply for either magnet schools or year-round schools, or both, whatever you choose. We will prioritize the applications with early colleges first, then year-round, and then magnet. And then results will be sent on February 14th to families.
Okay, so you want multi-track, apply in January. Even if you're part of the assignment plan, apply, and then there's a process to determine whether your application can be accepted or not.
That's correct. You select your
Approved or not.
priorities.
Accepted is not the right term. Approved or not. Okay. So I just want to make sure people understand that, because we are shifting some calendars on folks. There is a reprieve that's available through the multi-track application process in January.
And we'll continue to work with communications to make sure we get that information out to the public.
Thank you.
All right, so moving to the next slide, we've got the, this is the map from the addendum that we use. It's a little bit more detailed so you can see a little bit better. Now I think it's rolling up.
It's the next slide.
All right, there we go.
Yeah, it's not.
So here, the area in yellow is the proposed base attendance area. This is, again, from our original proposal. For Buckhorn Creek is in yellow. Holly Grove Elementary is in that tannish color. The purple is Lincoln Heights. Green is Herbert Akins. Brown would be Fuquay. Darker blue is Willow Springs. And then the pinkish color is Banks Road. And then when we go to the next slide, this gives you the proficiency numbers and the crowding projections that you're familiar with. These are all unchanged slides from the original proposal. All right. So as we move on to the next slide, I had shared this information during the public meeting at Holly Springs, and I wanted to bring this slide back because this is an important slide that staff feels to help people understand why we feel that we need traditional calendar schools in this particular area. As you can see, the only traditional calendar elementary schools in this area are Lincoln Heights, Fuquay, Verena Elementary, and then eventually E35, which isn't opening until 2020. The closest schools, if you go north, are Holly Ridge, and then Oakview, which is kind of off that map. Once you get past Oakview and Holly Ridge, and Oakview and Holly Ridge have been closed for transfers, they're both running over 100% capacity, as is Fuquay Elementary, which is capped. We have no other traditional calendar seats in this particular part of the county. The next closest schools you'd have to go to are Apex, Swift Creek, or Yates Mill, or into Garner, which would be Smith or Vandora Springs or Aversboro
Or Brian.
or Bryan Road. So the adverse of this, when you look at the next slide, is to show the year-round schools that we have in this particular area. This map is a little bit more broad, but it shows these are all of the year-round elementary and middle schools that we have in this area. Specifically, you've got Holly Grove Elementary, which is under an enrollment cap. You've got Herbert Akins, Valentine, Willow Springs, Banks Road, and Holly Springs Elementary. We do have available year-round seats for families to be able to apply to, and we're going to talk about that as we make our proposal in the next couple slides of how we could also offer additional year-round seats to families.
Lindsay?
Yes.
Is the M14 site being put on this particular slide, highlighting year-round elementary and middles, is that suggesting that we're looking at that calendar, or is that a decision to be made in the future, what
It's a
calendar
good question.
that goes on to?
Only because it shares the same campus as Herbert Akins Elementary would be, is that we're,
Just making
just
sure that it's
assuming
there.
that it would be year-round, but there is no determination that would come from you as the board.
Okay.
But again, that is
Since it's not
certainly,
funded and not scheduled.
it's correct.
Right.
It's at best, I
We've got time
believe,
to make
6
that
years
decision.
away. Is that right, Joe?
I think the
Well,
question
The
is six.
decision hasn't been made between this one and M12.
Right. But they are 6 years out.
Yeah.
Looking at the capacity at Herbert Akins, right now it's showing 97%. That has, are we saying that still has a fair amount of capacity?
What slide are you on?
Not a slide, this
This is
is,
also with 20 per classroom, so they haven't taken the,
If you look at the presentation numbers,
Yeah.
those are done based on next year's numbers.
okay.
Those are done based on
But
20
again,
this
it's
year.
comparing with everybody else in the area. So they will, with the new classroom numbers, they will be appropriately full.
111 or higher is what we're looking at.
And that's simply because kids are getting spread out?
The effective class of
Yeah,
the
class size.
school has reduced due to class size legislation.
So if the class size legislation goes back to what we're experiencing now or what we had last year, we'd see those capacity numbers go down.
More seats than we
More
anticipate.
seats,
we've
okay.
lost 140 seats in our newest elementary schools, which are built for 800 kids. We've lost 140 seats thanks to class size reductions per school. 140 seats per school. Meanwhile, back in the range.
So moving on to the next slide. So here's part of our new proposal. We're proposing that we still continue with the school opening as a traditional calendar. we are asking, we're proposing that for the families that would be applying to Herbert Akins as their designated year-round school, we would add an additional option of Ballantyne Elementary. It's a proximate year-round school to that base attendance area that does have additional seats that they could apply to. And all of the other information would remain the same on this particular slide. Moving to the next slide, we're going to show the updated map. So there's 3 things that staff is proposing. Again, staying on traditional calendar, we've made a minor change to the northern portion of the Buckhorn Creek base attendance area. And then again, adding Ballantyne as a year-round application school. Question?
So in, knowing the capacity of Holly Grove and Herbert Akins for next year, or our projected capacity, having Holly Grove and Ballantyne allows more families who want year-round calendar to stay on year-round calendar. They just have to decide whether it's calendar or proximity that works best for their family. And by opening these, Ballantyne as an additional school, this will allow more kids to stay on multi-track if that's what the family. And so if people are making this decision because it works for their family, it works for their life, I'm glad that we're opening that up. And it's not what folks are asking for, but it's a compromise between the two. If the other question I had was kind of going in the opposite direction, at Holly Grove Elementary, how many students, what is their traditional calendar option? I mean, we know the 2 traditional schools in Holly Springs that are there are crowded and then with Buckhorn being at under 80% capacity, is that looking to be an application school for Holly Grove for folks who want traditional?
I mean,
or is that, I don't.
I think in year 1, it may not be in our best interest to assign it for year 1, but we can definitely look for year 2.
And if they go back during the transfer period, not the
request for transfer period in
request for
February?
transfer period, they could apply, but without district transportation, correct?
You talking for year 2 or?
For year 1, is that a possibility or no?
She's talking about from Buckhorn, applying back.
If
Back to Holly
my
Grove,
base
Back to
is Holly Grove.
as a transfer as opposed to a year-round application.
No,
No.
the
Saying
opposite.
your base is Holly
If
Grove,
my
and you'd like
base
to
is
go to
Holly
Buckhorn.
Grove, and I've been trying to get out, but I have no traditional
Correct.
option,
Correct.
can I apply to Buckhorn, but without district-provided transportation?
That would be correct.
Okay.
Unless we designated it.
Second period.
Say-
The second period.
That would be in February?
Yeah, that would be in February during the request for transfer period, February 20th through March 6th. That would be the appropriate time for families who are seeking the traditional calendar to apply at that time.
So just for clarification, again, mainly for the public record, right? We are no longer designating traditional calendar option schools for every multi-track, is that correct?
That's incorrect. We are still providing transportation for certain addresses to certain traditional calendar schools.
Okay, so then my second question, is Buckhorn Creek the traditional calendar option for anybody, and if so, which schools?
Not at this time. It's not an application school at this time.
So could I maybe ask why? Because part of what we're talking about in this area is there is limited capacity. And ideally, we would open up the year-round seats for the people who want year-round seats and the traditional seats for the people who want traditional seats. So what would prevent us from opening or from having Buckhorn Creek as a traditional calendar option school for some of these schools?
So what's the current?
Right now, they go to Holly Ridge and Lincoln Heights.
So Lincoln Heights has capacity, Holly Ridge does not, right?
Not some.
And Lincoln Heights, we just made sure was not an overflow school for Fuquay, because we don't want
We want to fill it up with magnet
with
more
magnet.
than,
More,
yeah.
right, so.
I mean, if I'm missing something, I'd love to know that, right?
I think that generally speaking, we would not offer it as a traditional calendar application school in its first year, because we need to see how it fills. You recall that the last few schools that we've opened attracted more base than we anticipated. And so you have situations like Rogers Lane and
Hortons Creek.
Oakview, Hortons Creek, that from the get-go
Scotch
were
Ridge.
crowded, Scotch Ridge. And so I think that was out of an abundance of caution.
So do we know, I mean, if it's calendar option, right, the calendar option comes into effect if there is capacity, right? So it's not that they get in and then it necessarily crowds, does it? Or am I mistaking something?
We will have a lot more control over the movement of students. Just the concern is when you start looking at what happened with Hortons Creek, we allowed some kindergarten kids to get in, and now those families will continue to stay at that school, and that school has become crowded. So it's just, staff just felt it was best for the first year, for precautionary measure, to just not make it an application school, so we can kind of see, where the school's health will be, and then for year two, we can definitely look at that option.
How many students in the proposed base for Buckhorn are currently attending their traditional calendar option school? Right, because we're pulling from, there aren't really your traditional schools in that area to pull from, so we're forced to pull from year-round schools, but do we have an idea of how many?
120.
About 120?
Actually, 125.
125, okay. And those students then would just be reassigned to their base. They would not be staying at their calendar assignments or their application school that they're currently
They would be
at.
assigned to Buckhorn Creek.
Okay.
Yes.
They receive their assignment slip if their new base is Buckhorn and they have been calendared to a traditional as a choice. Their new assignment strip will show Buckhorn.
Okay.
I'm sensing that documenting this decision tree will be essential, not only for staff, but for board. And it's going to be the if this, then this. And there'll be some that we won't think of, that parents will call and say, well, this is my situation, what are my options? Mm-hmm. And so we've got the brain trust here who can go through those steps. I really would love to see it written down so that we have consistency across all of our student assignment staff when they're talking with the public.
We are working on both media, perhaps videos or things that help walk parents through by looking at a strip or a screen when they're interacting with us, as well as a potential flow chart that actually shows how you move in different directions depending on where you're headed. So we're looking at all of that in a very short turnaround time.
Sure.
The only
Okay,
concern
great.
that staff has with that is that so many students are assigned to schools under certain circumstances, and so there's lots of different scenarios that could play out.
You've got I'm sure you'll have, somebody, well, we're in a preschool program here, what are our options? The variations and the flexibility that we provide families is so vast, okay, that when we have to make a change, it's not a group impact, it's an individual impact and there are options for families to deal with what those may be. So, Lindsay.
And for that, what I've been saying to parents, because I don't know all of the factors.
Right.
Like, we've done this has happened, and this is our unique family situation. I've, been pointing families to call the Office of Student Assignment number perhaps whether it's on this, whether it's somewhere to have that. I know it's at the bottom of our website under Contact Us, but just so they know, like, if you're not getting your answer from this, please, contact us and either whether it's through a general email or so that we can let families know that we're able to help them walk through these situations. Because I think it's good that we provide options, but it's also, it's very different because there are so many options. You tend to not always know what's available or how to go about doing it. And I did notice the flyers around the schools letting people know about the application window and when that's coming. So thank you for putting that out there.
Well, related to this decision tree issue, right? The calendar, the request for multi-track year-round will be the first decision, right? That's even before, well, they get the base slips come out first.
On January 4th.
Then decisions will be made about multi-track year-round. We'll get to see then how many people are applying where. Do we have capacity to seat? Do we not have capacity to seat? Do we need to open up capacity? What have you. We don't know what that answer is right now. If we read one set of emails, we would be led to believe that, there's going to be floods somewhere. Maybe will, maybe won't, right? But we need to know that. But we've got that next decision tree point, and isn't the traditional application after
Correct.
that? The traditional application is after the year-round decision.
Yeah, so they'll get the results on February 14th for year-round, and then the traditional applications can start on February 20th.
So that's, at that point, it strikes me we'll have a better sense, rather than necessarily needing to wait till the subsequent year, as to whether or not Buckhorn Creek can be a traditional calendar option school. So it strikes me that there might be some wisdom to even articulating where we even think it may be in the future, and can't we control that level once we know the numbers? And the last thing we want is Buckhorn Creek to open up under-enrolled. I don't think that's going to be the case, but we don't want that scenario there. And it just strikes me we're going to have that information such that we could go ahead and say, you can apply to calendar option school. I mean, Lincoln Heights is the one calendar traditional option. The only other in the area, right, is
Holly Ridge and Oakview.
Holly Ridge has a
but
little bit,
not really.
but not much. Oakview has nothing.
Right.
So,
Fuquay's capped.
and Fuquay's capped. So, I mean, our argument is that we need traditional capacity for people to apply to. So then if we don't allow that to be possible, it just seems like a disconnect.
Jim, let's put this on a parking lot.
Okay.
For staff to respond to, okay? Because I think your point's well made.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to understand if
but
there's a reason not to do this.
To make the, to respond on the fly here, it might not be the wisest thing for us.
So, it's, our experience has been with the last few schools that we opened, including Oakview, that predominantly came out of a multi-track year-round base and moved into a traditional, that the schools opened at a much higher level of crowding than we expected.
Yeah.
And so we have a similar situation again, but and though we did have some community sentiment when we opened Oakview about being moved from year-round to a traditional base,
Yeah.
I think we've seen a little bit more of that this time around, and a longer stick-to-itiveness around it. So it is certainly possible that offering Buckhorn as the traditional calendar application school for a Holly Grove, for example, in this case, might make sense. And our previous experience with the last 4 or 5 schools that we've opened that came in higher than we expected would not happen in this case, given the number of families, percentage that are coming out of a multi-track year-round. But we also know that we've got to look at the available seats when they apply for a multi-track year-round in the area. So there's a judgment call being made there, and if we were to make Buckhorn Creek a traditional calendar application school now, for Holly Grove Elementary Base, for example, I think it'd be okay for a year. I don't know how much longer, because in some cases, once kids get into a school, they don't leave.
Yeah.
Right? And so depending on what's happening with the residential growth that's already baked into the numbers, as well as what people are asking for and how many actually end up there, it's not an exact science.
You mentioned don't want it to open under-enrolled. I would say if we get 80%, between 70 and 80%, that school's fully enrolled.
No, that's our expected enrollment.
Right.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah. No,
okay, all right,
I meant under our expected, yes.
Okay, all right. Kathy?
And I think it's important, what Ms. Moore just said, about all of the new development and the building that is continuing to go.
Right, that we've got
And that
growth.
that has been rolled into the projection. That is not, we have definitely used our statisticians to project that, and that's why we got there.
You double-checked that twice.
Yeah, thank you. I
Double-checked it twice.
Twice,
so-
yes.
That's four.
All right.
And during the January 10th to 31st, when you can apply for a year-round school, does it matter what day that you apply?
No, so.
So you don't have any better chance whether you do it on the 10th? I think it's important to state that, because I remember the early days of Magnet,
the post office at
where,
midnight.
oh my gosh, you had to, people were driving to the post office.
See, it's not first come, first serve.
Okay.
Applications can be submitted at any point during that application window.
Okay.
And then students are selected based on selection criteria.
I will say the benefit of filing early is that you remember to do it.
That's very true.
You don't have a technology problem, you don't have a, you
Yes,
get it done.
get it done early, but you don't have, yeah.
Right. So you want to continue?
I think we had another question.
Oh, so my question was about the application process. So if you, I want to make sure that I'm not pulling you too far off track. But I just wanted to, is it just, because I know when I had to do it, it was you just tick the boxes of the schools that you're applying to with the student number, and then that's kind of it. What's different this coming year about that process?
So for year-round, the difference would be is that when you get to the screen, you'll see year-round on one side, Magnet on another side with drop-down boxes. And so
Okay.
that'll be the only difference as opposed to other years and other applications that we've done.
So, and I know with the hardship transfer, you shared a little bit of commentary. Is there a,
So during the request for transfer period, you'll be able to do that. If you check like other or hardship, it will open up a text box for you to provide your information.
okay.
Everyone else who checks a reason like back to base, employee working at the same school, or grandfathering, or such as those, they will not need a text box, because if we just check that on the back end, can confirm that, and will automatically approve those.
Okay, and if I have a rising fifth grader and I want to stay at the school that I'm at, when do I request that? Or is that a separate,
February 20th through March 6th.
okay. Are we prompting those families that we know have rising fifth graders, or do I actively have to seek that out?
So that will be on the assignment strips. That will be in the communications that we send out from the district to families. We will-
Okay.
But families do have to tell us that they want their fifth grader to stay.
Okay, so it's
And
not
their
automatic.
sibling for 1 year.
Correct. And they'll need to do separate applications for each of them.
Okay,
Okay.
thank
All
you.
right, so the next slide takes us to, this is the base attendance area of Buckhorn Creek outlined in the darker black. The green section shows
Yeah.
which neighborhoods would be able to apply to Holly Grove and Holly Springs. And the blue sections will be the area that can apply to both Herbert Akins and Ballantyne. I just wanted to give you a visual of what I had said staff proposed in earlier slides.
And what do you, never mind.
And for the area that's getting moved from Herbert Akins to Lincoln Heights, what is their application?
So Lincoln Heights, the application schools are Willow Springs and, I believe it's Willow Springs and Herbert Akins. I can double check that, but
Okay.
I'm pretty sure Herbert Akins
But
is
Willow
the county.
Springs is capped.
That is correct. So Herbert Akins would be an option for them.
Okay. But not Valentine. I'm just, I'm just curious as if we're going to send kids to a cap school. I'm just trying to think out loud. you
That's a
know.
good point. I mean,
Documented.
Put it on our question tree.
would you like to see something like that on Tuesday? If we run the numbers between now and then, would you like to see something like that for Tuesday?
I mean, I don't like giving options that really aren't options.
Right.
And if it's a cap
Yeah.
school, it doesn't,
It's not an
it's not
option.
really an option, unless it's a hardship, and then if there's seats, so.
Actually, I could look it up before we leave. When I get away from the table, I'll look it up, and I can tell you exactly.
Thank you.
Thank
What
you.
is the 476 area?
That is Lincoln Heights.
That's Lincoln Heights, okay.
I thought of another one.
Okay.
Um,
That's what we have.
So slide 11 is
yeah.
the revised numbers for.
Yes, so this would be under the new proposal. These would be the new numbers.
Okay.
If you don't have any questions about that. And then slide 12 was just a recap for families to understand that what the grandfathering rules were. We just added the slide for elementary because we're only talking about Buckhorn Creek and the related schools. So fifth graders would be able to grandfather as well as their siblings for 1 year. And then after that year, the siblings will be assigned back to their base. Yes.
Lindsay?
Are we able to get Valentine on here, or can you send us the information for Valentine, like similar to what we see on slide 11, just so we know? I mean, I think I'm making some assumptions based off of the sheets that we've seen in the past, but it would be nice to have that up there so that families can see, and also Holly Springs, since they are going to be application options.
See how quickly I can get that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It may delay me with getting you the final version by Friday, but I'll do my best.
Okay. I mean, even if it's, just the percentages for, 1 year, just what we can have, so we have that information for,
Okay. And then our last slide is just, we're going to be bringing this to the board on December 19th, looking for final approval. And then just to remind you that in January, or February, more like January, we're going to start to bring discussions to you as the board with regards to looking ahead to 1920, the enrollment proposal for that year, as well as, the calendar discussions that we had previously broached in this enrollment plan. So, go ahead.
It's going to be important to get a sense of what the board's goal is around the work that we would be doing between January and April prior to bringing you the priorities for the next 1920 enrollment plan, around calendar alignment in that area or other parts of the county. I think we're going to probably go ahead and throw in the discussion that we need to go ahead and have around the calendar for Alston Ridge Middle.
And perhaps Parkside.
Perhaps Parkside. So those are all things that we're planning to work on earlier, but I think understanding from the board what your goals are in terms of what you want staff to give you, that will help narrow our work and the options that we bring you.
So when do you want to do that?
Well, that's the work in January, I think, with the board, because I think shortly after we establish the goals, we want to open up opportunities for stakeholder review, feedback, prioritization around that as well. And that's a little bit different than what we've done before, but before we go reaching out to communities that may or may not have children in our school or they, in different parts of the county, we need to be assured of what the goals are and what we're trying to get, the information we're trying to get from them.
Lindsay?
I think I'm excited to hear that, because I think one of the things that we're working on, that would be helpful is to get information from communities before they are impacted by this. So waiting until, September 19th, it's a very emotional thing for a family. It's hard to leave the school and the community that you built, and so to be able to have some time in between, just so we can get that information, that's a little, you can't take emotion out of your decision when it comes to your kid's school, but I think it would be less emotional.
Let me ask you
Yeah.
to unpack that a little
Yeah.
bit. How would that be done? When would that be done? Because when staff doesn't know
Right.
who's going to be impacted by the opening of Parkside Elementary, for example.
Right, and so, my thought is we could, take, if we know the general areas of the county, whether we go further, into a geographic area and expand it, and just get the temperature of a given geographic area, so like the northwest area of Wake. So not,
So, and how would that be done? How would we get that temperature?
I mean, you could, it would be trying to craft the right questions, obviously, to make sure, because the way that a question is phrased is important, but you could have a survey, and parents would have to put in their student number so we know it's a Wake County parent, or, just thinking of ways that we can get community input in this process before it's,
Okay.
so that's, just so we get some ideas.
I understand what you're asking now. Jim?
So Chair Johnson Tosser's not here, but I guess to get at some of the priorities that you're talking about, Ms. Moore, is there energy around, should we have a I mean, we can't do a full retreat probably this year because we're going to be so tied up with the superintendent search, which is going to take a lot of extra time. But do we need to sit around for a half day focused on that, or do we want to put this into work session or one of the other committees? And we don't really have a formal place for this discussion to happen, and so that's why I'm just sort of trying to get a sense of how would we go about what you're talking about.
Kathy?
Well, I've talked to Monica about this, and she's doing some work on whether do we need another committee that's a student assignment committee, or do we need what you're proposing, a half a day? I do think we need an extended time for all of us to be on the same page. Do we want, because Mr. Agee, you've talked about the pillars, and maybe one needs to be weighted more, or do we need to prioritize? I think that's a decision as a board. We need to have the time to flush out and decide what is it going to be. And then, as Ms. Mahaffey says, talk to our folks and say, okay, so which is the most important to you, or is proximity the most important thing, or is calendar more important? I think just hearing from a survey or from public forums so that we give our families the opportunities to directly have input into that is a positive thing. I've already heard, because the 2 new schools opening are in my district, and I have been talking and hearing from them since I was appointed in February. That was the first thing. So it'll, and I have assured them their voices are going to be heard. But don't know what the form's going to be.
The challenge, I agree, we need some time to focus on this and to brainstorm, and
Yeah.
the challenge would be for us to get out of the weeds and to get up to the clouds
Yes.
Right.
and to look at, to in some ways ignore existing boundaries and our patterns to see how do we help the district move forward and deal with our growth issues, and also the constraints we have in terms of operational and capital funding as well.
And I think that's what we've done with Buckhorn when we've gotten out of the weeds and we've gotten up here and we've looked and we've gone back to the core. What does, why did we decide that this was traditional? Well, there's data to support that. And you look at the map and you see what's there. And yes, we know that that's going to affect individual families, but deciding what's best for the district.
But I think with having the multiple calendar application schools, I think that will allow more families where that's their priority to have that. And as much as, I've heard from folks that they want year-round, as much as I've spoken about it, I feel like having that is it's a compromise, and families will have to make that choice, but they have the choice. And so I'd like to see.
Having what again?
You said multiple calendar?
Multiple applications. So if I'm at Buckhorn and I live in one geographic area, I can apply to 2 different year-round schools. So there are essentially 4 different schools that families can apply to if they prefer multi-track year-round. And I may not get the one that I want, but if that's the calendar that my family needs, that works for my family, that works for my kids, I know as a parent I'm going to make it work. And I'd like to see as many, and I know Ms. Cash would as well, as many families seated in those schools. Because we know that that base is going to grow for traditional. Because I know the district, we see the need for traditional in that area as well.
Okay, well, one of the issues is calendaring a time for us to be together. And so I'll talk with the board chair about that and what might make sense, and staff, in terms of the precursor to goal setting, if you will. Jim?
Well, in that goal-setting discussion, and this is something I struggle with every year when we deal with this assignment stuff, this is the one area where I feel like we get too much to be a managing board instead of a governing board. And we have to some degree because we represent the constituents in our districts, so I get that. But I wonder where we potentially need to shift the way assignment is done so that we can be much more of a governing board thinking district-wide rather than should we be looking at, here the boundary should be here. That seems like a managing decision, right. And we've got capable staff. At some level, we need to be able to sort of approve the recommendations of staff rather than saying, hey, staff, go do this. So how we find that balance, I think, is important as well.
Language matters.
Language matters, it really does.
So I'll take that to Monica and Kathy and see what possible matrix comes out, fits in with what staff already believes needs to be done by April. In addition to handling all the new application and transfer process that would be going on. Did you want to add something?
Have we ever had a student assignment committee?
I don't know.
Have we
I
ever
don't know
had
that
a
we
student
have.
assignment committee?
There's a board committee. Chuck Delaney had the community committee.
Yeah, the staff has had a parent group as a staff-oriented group to kibitz on.
In the past, though, that's not.
Oh, yeah, in the past.
Yeah.
I think the previous board did have a task force of sorts for a short period of time.
The board
Many
did,
previous
the board level.
boards.
The model was suggested to me one time by a former mayor, was the planning board, that the elected board didn't have anything to do with student assignment, that they put it over to a planning board that acted like a zoning approvals and managing growth purely with staff or with public that wasn't elected. And I don't know that I like that model, but it's an interesting suggestion that might be worth revisiting. What I'm getting here, we've got some questions. Buckhorn as a potential calendar option for folks in multi-track school. Some thoughts about the decision tree. What are the multi-track options for the folks who are at Lincoln Heights, whether they're new to Lincoln Heights or existing? Adding Ballantyne and Holly Springs school capacity and enrollment information to slide 11. Have I omitted anything that we had asked staff about that we didn't get answers on?
The only other thing I had written down was to look at Lincoln Heights Elementary and the application schools for them as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought I
that
said
was-
that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Language is important. All right, this has been a good discussion, and I as much as we've asked questions of staff, given our knowledge of how the system works, the public's got to have opportunities to get answers to. So it's going to be an interesting thing. I want to thank the board members for their hard work on this and parsing through the myriad of opinion and the avalanche of email that we've gotten in addition to the feedback on Granicus, in sorting out and determining what are the objectives the district needs to accomplish when we open this school and moving down that path. So thank you very much for your hard work.